After the underwhelming performance and lukewarm reviews, you'd figure Capcom wouldn't be so quick to jump into another first-person Biohazard spin-off. But not 2 years after the first Gun Survivor game, the Big C was making good on an agreement to deliver an RE tie-in to Japanese arcades. This new entry would drop the survival horror aspirations altogether and go full arcade action. But can a game all about scoring points possibly hold a candle to the survival horror dynasty that spawned it? Well, I think you guys can guess the answer. What's up guys, I'm Jared from Avalanche Reviews. Welcome to the Resident Evil Retrospective. Biohazard Gun Survivor didn't set the world on fire when it released for the PS1 in the late 90s. If anything, it came close to feeling like a legitimate member of the family, but an obvious fixation on action over the typical slow burn of a classic RE game ultimately held it down. So when Capcom decided to fully commit to one side of that equation, they were at least moving in the right direction. The two major parts of the first Gun Survivor did seem to be at odds with each other, and even though I would have preferred an attempt at first-person horror, the move to arcade action made sense too. And I should probably mention, this is a follow-up to my review of the first Gun Survivor game, so if you're feeling a bit lost, click in the corner of the screen to check it out. Hitting arcades first, you would assume Gun Survivor 2 would be pretty damn light on story, and you'd be right. The game essentially acts like a rundown of Code Veronica's campaign for people with ADD. There's no voice acting, and Japanese still reads like hieroglyphics to me, so I can't personally confirm whether or not the curse of bad dialogue in RE games has carried over, but a quick look at the PAL release of the game shows this definitely to be the case. And that's about all I can say about this quote-unquote story. It barely counts as a condensed version of the source material and explains away huge inaccuracies like Nemesis showing up with an ending that shows this was all a dream of Claire's after the end of Code Veronica. In a word,
it stinks, it stinks, it stinks.
Gameplay in Gun Survivor 2 is spread out across a few different modes. Arcade mode is exactly what it sounds like, and we'll go over the rest in a second. Capcom essentially copied tank controls into the first Gun Survivor game, but Part 2 has made some changes. Up and down moves you forward and backwards now, and instead of turning, left and right allows you to strafe. So if you're wondering how to actually turn your head, well, you better get used to the unintuitive nature of using L1 and R1 to turn. This change control scheme, while really clunky, makes sense when you consider the fact that Gun Survivor 2 has ditched the ready weapon button in favor of a more traditional FPS style. Your guns are always out, so shooting and moving at the same time is now a viable option, and you're never going to have to worry about aiming since a very generous auto-aim has been implemented. In theory, this would make the game more fun and less methodical, but only half of that equation works out in reality. The arcadey bullet hit effects and fast pace can be pretty satisfying for a bit, but it's really easy to take cheap hits, which means the later areas in the game are an absolute chore. Just like the first Gun Survivor, the game works on a lives system, but even 3 lives weren't enough to get me to this game's ending on normal difficulty. I always found myself taking unavoidable damage from the Hunter boss, and that always ate up one of my lives. To solve the problem of getting hit by attacks coming from off screen, the camera actually angles up when you're near an enemy. Instead of helping though, this typically sent me running right into some obstruction and even felt a bit disorienting in some cases. But hey, it's always cool when a first-person game gives you body awareness, so there is an upside here. By now you probably noticed the timer in the corner, and at first this thing stressed me the hell out. I figured I would die if I ran out of time, but actually Nemesis shows up to chase you through the level when this happens. He's bulletproof and does massive damage, but at least you have a chance at living if you've spent too much time checking out other rooms and looking for weapons. The rest of the bosses in the game are obviously ripped from Code Veronica, and for the most part are kind of fun, and you'll always have an AI partner with you, which definitely helps out. Of course, all this applies to the arcade mode, but there's a little bit more fun to be had elsewhere. The score attack mode is pretty self-explanatory, but dungeon mode is where I spent most of my time. Something about it felt like the VR missions in Metal Gear Solid, and since it's not part of an arcade campaign meant to eat quarters, the difficulty is much more forgiving. As you would imagine, playing through these difficult modes will unlock weapons and characters, but to be honest, it's not really worth it. Your first time playing the game will more than likely expose you to everything it has to offer, which isn't much. I had some fun in dungeon mode and was surprised at how much I enjoyed a series of missions that had me shooting hundreds of roaches on a wall, but after my first hour, I was pretty much over it. It's kind of weird, but the part of the first Gun Survivor that endeared me to it was the crappy attempt at emulating an actual RE game. Without the restraints of classic-era Resident Evil and the dial turned all the way to action, Capcom ended up making the worst playing game I covered so far in the retrospective. Of course, that doesn't mean there isn't any value to be found here. The novelty of playing an entry in the RE universe that never made it to American shores is always nice, and it'll only run you about $20 for a Japanese copy. So yeah, maybe it's not the best playing game in the world. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it plays like ass. But for the right RE fan, this could make a nice little addition to the collection. Now, if you thought the jump to the PS2 would make for a graphical upgrade to the source material, well, think again. This game was made on Sega's Naomi arcade architecture, so essentially a Dreamcast but with more memory for video and audio. All of the assets seem to be straight dumps of what was originally on the Dreamcast version of Code Veronica, and a few enemies that didn't come from a Dreamcast game aren't exactly easy on the eyes. You'd figure the PS2 would allow for a pretty smooth port, but I think the slowdown here is even worse than what I found in the first game. I mean, it doesn't get as bad, but it's more often. It only takes a few of the right enemies and effects on screen to get things chugging well below 20 frames per second, and it seems like even the firing of your own gun contributes to this. I was kind of excited at first because I assumed I would see some classic Code Veronica areas and scenarios from a different perspective, but I gotta say, Code Veronica's own first-person mode blows this game out of the water on that front. The new areas, or at least new takes on old areas, all seem cheap and condensed. While Steve and Claire's character models look nice enough in cutscenes, they look robotic and animate like crap when you look at them during gameplay. Weapon models also look pretty shitty, and the big flashy hit effects covers up any blood splatter, so I can't even enjoy that. If I had to sum up this game, weighing all the new content with the reused Code Veronica assets, I'd say it's just cheap feeling. I guess I shouldn't really expect much more from an arcade game, and honestly I went in with low expectations, but I'll be damned if I wasn't disappointed anyways. So yeah, I'm sure you guys saw this one coming, but Biohazard Gun Survivor 2 is total crap. Yeah, you could argue that I shouldn't be surprised considering the game it precedes, but at least Gun Survivor had heart. You could tell that it was really trying to mold the two worlds of survival horror and first-person shooting. It may have failed, but there is some value in that. At the very least, it was an interesting experiment, but Part 2 is just a lifeless attempt at cheap arcade thrills. It's clear from the graphics, lack of voice acting, and many cut corners that it wasn't something Capcom really believed in, and because of that, I can only recommend it to the most avid collector of RE games. For the rest of you, trust me, we didn't miss out on much by not getting this one stateside. And that's about it for me, but don't you worry, we still have one more Gun Survivor game to go through, well, two, or at least 1.5. Listen, it's complicated, okay? But anyways, I hope to see all of you right here on the next entry in the Resident Evil Retrospective. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you want to check out my review of the last Gun Survivor game, you can find it right here. And if you want to see more videos like this, click that subscribe button, even though that really doesn't mean that much anymore. I also want to thank the incredible people who support me on Patreon. You guys are the reason I'm covering these games, and I can't say thank you enough. Well guys, catch you later.